when I was teaching my little brother, I used to tell him, just get a tattoo. Just tattoo that stuff on your arm or something, because he would always forget. Show your arm, Git add dash capital A. Oh, what's that? It's a great way to pick up the ladies, definitely. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Jamie, and in this video we're going to be covering Git, and this will be the first video in a series of videos covering like basic tools that you need to be a like professional coder. If you're trying to like train yourself to be a professional coder, this is like the kind of stuff that I would teach you. And so the first lesson, which is this video, is on Git, and that's Git. And what Git is basically it's like a code management system. So it's used to back up your code for one, and like it can back up at different times. So like say you were building a home page, you would probably want to back up using Git like at the start, like when you first start the project, and then like for each milestone, milestone is just a word for like goal, like each goal you hit. So like if you make the navigation bar like the header for your site, maybe you add like the home page. Just like each milestone that you do, you want to back up to Git. And I'll talk more about why in a second, but that's kind of like best practice. So it's like a version control for your code basically. So this will make more sense probably when we start doing it. But first I just want to make sure that you have Git installed. So I'm here at I just googled install Git, and I just clicked on this first link because they really explain quite well how to do it. So there's instructions for Linux up here. I'm assuming most of you are on Mac or Windows though. So if you're on Mac, then you just type git space dash dash version in your terminal. So open up a terminal. You can do that by using command space and then just type in term. But I use this terminal, and basically you just run git dash dash version, and then it'll prompt you to install the command line tools, and then that will install Git for you. If you're on Windows, it says just to click on this link right here, and then yeah, just go through the download, the installer. Alright, so I'm just going to make a new folder in my file system, and then that folder is just going to be called Git test, and then I'm going to open that folder inside of VS Code. It's a lot easier if you just use VS Code for this if you're following along, because VS Code comes with a terminal which you can just drag up from the bottom of the screen. So basically I'm just going to open that folder, and I'm in Git test right now, and then I'm just going to add a new file, and then I'm just going to call it 1.txt. So let's just pretend that this is a code file, and then I'll show you how to open up the terminal. You just drag up from the bottom here, and then in this terminal, this is where we're going to be running the Git commands. So now that you have Git installed, we're going to be able to run Git commands in order to like back up our project and so forth. So in here, I'm just going to type the word 1 just for testing. Okay, so now let's start getting into the Git part of it. So I'm just going to go down here in the terminal and then just type Git Status. So the first thing you'll notice is that it says that this is not a Git repository. So in order to run any Git commands in the terminal, you already need to be in a folder with another folder in that folder called .git. And that's the folder that stores all of the like information, like all of the backups for your project and so forth locally. Like that's where it's all stored. But this says that it's not a repository, and there's no .git folder. So the way you can fix that is you run git space init. Okay, and so then it says initialized empty Git repository in this location. So you can see that it just made a folder .git And by the way, any folders that start with a dot are invisible to the file system, which is why you don't see it here in the VS Code Navigator. Alright, so I've initialized an empty repository. And a repository is just basically like a bucket of code, pretty much. So now that's initialized, I can type git status, and then we'll see that it says on branch master, and branches are kind of more advanced, so I'm just going to leave that out of this video. For now, just know that you're on branch master, and there's only one branch. It's basically like a version history, so you're just on branch master. Just kind of ignore that part. And then it says no commits yet. So in Git, the snapshots which I was describing earlier, like your backups of your code, they're basically like what are called commits, and a commit is just a series of changes. So you can see down here that it says we have an untracked file, and it's called 1.txt. So our folder only has one file in it right now, and that's called 1.txt. So it's telling us that it's untracked, and we can use git add and then the file name to include that file so that you can commit it or take a snapshot. So basically, like, all files are untracked by Git by default, and then as soon as you add one, so I could add it using git space add space. I always just use -A, and that just adds all the files, because like I almost always just want to add all the files. If you want to add a specific file, you can just type in the name of that file there, like 1.txt. But almost always I just use -A. Okay, so once I run git add -A, you'll notice if I run git status once again, everything's the same except for it says new file 1.txt. So since we added that file to be tracked by Git, it now realizes, oh, that's a new file. You haven't committed that before, so it's just a new file. Great, thanks for telling me about that. Okay, so now that I have the file tracked by Git, I can run git commit to basically like capture all of those tracked files and take a snapshot of them, or whatever changes you made to those files. So with git commit, you always run it with -m, and then you provide the message which you'd like. It's basically like the description of the snapshot. So I'm just going to type in one file created. Alright, so this is just a textual description that goes in quotes of whatever you did. And it's good to have like fairly descriptive messages so that if you ever want to revert back, you can realize, oh, that's what I was doing, that's a safe commit to go back to, and so I'm always trying to do a good message there. And also you can't really put like a lot of special characters in there. I would just try and make it mostly words. I think you can put commas and some other things, but yeah, I mostly try and leave that pretty plain. Alright, so after I ran git commit, it says one file created, one file changed, one insertion. So it's just talking about this file and then this line of text. Okay, and so if I run git status, which if you haven't figured out by now, git status just tells you what's going on, what is the status of my project. So it says git status on branch master, nothing to commit, working tree is clean. And that's just basically saying that you've already snapshotted all your files, you have no changes which are not already stored in a snapshot by Git. Okay? And by snapshot I mean commit. Alright, but up until this point, everything is basically inside of this folder called .git. So if I ls -al, that's just a command to list all of the files in this directory, including the hidden ones, basically. You'll see there's a .git file here, and all the snapshots, they're all just stored inside of that .git folder. Okay, and then that's not really good enough yet, because we want to back up to the cloud, because if something happens to your computer, you want your files to be backed up on the cloud. I do that using a website called GitHub. Probably heard of it. So it's github.com, and I'm just going to start a new project here, and the project is going to be called probably just git test, same, and then it's going to be public by default, and then I'm just going to create it. Okay, and then it tells you bunch of stuff, but basically the only thing you really need at this point is the git remote add origin and then this URL. So this URL is like the URL of the repository on the web, and so if we want to back up to the web, we first need to run that command. So git remote add origin, then just that URL, and then so now our repository is linked to that, and so the next command that we can run is called git push origin master, and what that does is it basically just pushes all of your code to the web, all of your commits rather. So any commits which you haven't pushed yet, it just pushes all of those, and so then it will be stored on the web. So I'll just run that. Oh, and while you're running those commands, you probably could have gotten an error that says like you're not logged in or something like that, or like you don't have authority to push to that URL. Basically, you'll want to go to just Google Git login, and then click the first link for Git first time setup, and then this can cover like a bunch of stuff that you could need to do. I think that all you would need to do really is just run this git config -- global, and then configure your name and your email, and then when you once it knows your email, once you try and push, it'll just ask you for your password. So I believe that's all you need to do. If there's anything else you need to do that I missed, it'll probably be in here. Okay, so now that you've successfully pushed your code, in this case to GitHub, we can just go over here. I'm just going to click on git test, and then you can see that it's showing all the files which I have in this repository, and there's just one right now. It's called 1.txt. So I can just click on that, and then it just has the word 1 in it. That's fine. So you can see that it's backed up on the web, and that's great. And since this is a public repository, other people can clone or download this, and that just means that like if you wanted to build something, like collaborate with other people, they could do the same thing. Like they could clone it, and then they could request to push to your code, if you allow it at least. Let's get back to talking about like the basics of how you push and so forth. Okay, so I'm just going to go to this file and add some ones to the beginning of the file, just to illustrate something. So I'm going to go back in the terminal and type git space diff, and then here you can see that it prints out like the changes that you've made to the files here. So like it only has the difference. That's important to note. So like when Git takes snapshots, it's only snapshotting the differences, and it's able to construct like if you wanted to revert back a couple of commits, it'll just like undo the commits in order, and it's able to revert back to a previous state. So it's designed very well, and it's very optimized. So Git is a great tool. Also, if your terminal isn't like big enough for your changes to fit, then you'll be in like this scrollable view where you can use the arrow keys to go up and down. And if you want to know how to get out of this, just press Q, and then Q will get you out of that. And then I'm just gonna clear the terminal using Command K, for Mac at least. I'm not sure what it is for Windows. And then I can run Git Status to get a more like broad overview of what's happened. I've just modified this file. Let's also add another file. So I'm just gonna add another file called 2.txt, and in there I'm just gonna put some 2's. And then I'm gonna just run git status once again, and you can see that this file is modified, and then this one is a new file which isn't yet tracked. And so if you want to add all those changes and commit once again, then again all you do is git add -A git commit -M, and then I'm going to say 2 and changed 1. Okay, and then I'm going to run git push origin master. So you'll notice that most of the time you just only need to do these 3 commands: git add -A, git commit -M message, and then git push origin master. And now that that's all done, I'm just going to go back here and refresh the page, and then you'll see that 1 has our changes right there, and then the file 2 now exists, again with the 2's at the start of it. I'm going to show you another thing which is very, very useful. It's called git ignore, and I use this all the time. So I'm going to make a file here called git ignore, and it's just one word like that. And then this file stores basically like all of the files which you would like to not track. And so in here I could put like 3.txt, and then maybe a folder called node_modules, which doesn't exist yet, but I'll create both of these files. And these files will not be tracked or noticed by Git. So it's a way, like the reason you might want to use this is if there's like a file, like some sort of configuration file that you just don't want to share, like it's private, it changes for every person, or like very big one is like big files which you just don't want to back up to Git, like the node. Like if you use npm, there's this folder called node modules, and node modules is pretty much like the downloads of all of the binaries of all of the packages you're using, but they can be installed like in an instant just running npm I, because all those files are declared in a file called package.json. Yeah, I'm going to be doing a different video on npm because it's extraordinarily useful for web developers. But basically, just keep in mind that git ignore is used to ignore files and folders which you don't want to be backed up to Git. You don't want to track changes to it. And mostly it's just going to be binaries and some configuration files. Okay, so I'm just going to make a new file called 3.txt. And then you'll notice it's gray here, and that's because VS Code is smart and it realizes that this file that's in the git ignore, and so it doesn't want to track changes to it. Like you can see that the git ignore file itself is green, and that means that it realizes that Git hasn't tracked that file yet, and it's a new potential file. But 3 is not; it's in the git ignore. So I've made the 3 file, and I'm also going to make a folder called node modules, and I'll even put another file inside of there called my node file.txt. And then I'm just going to go back here and run Git Status, and you can see that the only file that's been changed is the .gitignore, or rather it's like the only file that Git realizes that it could potentially want to take a snapshot of. So since we're all ready, we have all our files, I'm just going to run git add -A, git commit -M, and then the message, so it's just the git ignore, and then git push origin master. I recommend you memorize these 3 commands. When I was teaching my little brother, I used to tell him, just get a tattoo, just tattoo that stuff on your arm or something, because he would always forget. And I thought it was pretty funny. Just tattoo, just show your arm, git add -A. Oh, what's that? It's a great way to pick up the ladies, definitely. Okay, so now that we've we've pushed all our files. I'm just going to refresh the page here, and you can see that only the git ignore is added, and that's because the other ones are in the they're like mentioned in the git ignore file, so they're not going to be added. They're not going to be tracked at all. Alright, now there are two other topics I want to cover before I wrap this video up. Very important. First one is like pulling from Git, and then the other one is like reverting to an old backup. So let's do that one first, reverting to an old backup. So if I run git log, that's another command, then again I'll be in this scrollable list just using the arrow keys of all of the commits. So you can see that it has all three of my commits. It has this one, which is called git ignore, this one where the description is two and changed one, and then this one is called 1. Anyways, so I can revert back to any one of these commits if I want to. So I'm just going to copy this commit identifier right here. It's automatically assigned an identifier by Git. So I'm just going to copy that and then run git checkout and then that commit identifier, and then it's going to tell me that I am now in a detached head state. You can look around, make experimental changes, and commit them, and you can discard changes you make in this state without impacting the branches by performing another checkout. So basically it just means that, like I told you that branches were kind of more advanced. This kind of touches branches a little bit, so you need to know a little bit more. Basically, like a branch is just like a timeline version. So, like, think about it as like the main master timeline is just like one series of events, and then someone can like branch out of that series of events and make their own changes, and then eventually they can merge back into the other timeline. It's just a way of like keeping versions of the code separate from each other and still allowing people to like make changes, and then eventually you can merge back. Specifically, this right now says we're in a detached state, which basically just means that we've broken out from that timeline, but we're not even on another branch. We're just kind of out in oblivion right now, and that just means that any changes we make, like they're not really going to affect the master branch or the master timeline. And the reason you might want to do something like this is if you're just testing, like if the code broke and you just wanted to like go back to a version, try and figure out when it broke, or like when the last stable version was, and then like notice any changes that might have broken the app since then. You might want to like check out each version and then just like run the app, whatever you need to do to figure out if this version works. Since I've checked out this command right here, you can see that it's called the head, and head just means that this is where I am in the history of commits. Like this is where I jumped back to. And then if I wanted to jump back here to the very first one, then I could git checkout that one. And then you can see that the to file has disappeared because I went back to the very first commit, which only had one, like the 1.txt. But you can see that like the ignored files are actually still there. Node modules and 3.txt, they're still there because they're ignored by Git. And even the .git ignore file itself, that too is gone because I went back to before it existed. If I want to jump back to like the master, like the most recent commit, I just do git checkout master. Then I run Git Status, Git branch. So I'm back on master and I have all of my files. I just ran git branch in order to see what branch I was on, just make sure I wasn't in a detached state. And so yeah, it looks like that's good. Git branch just tells you what branch you're on, and The only branch you really need to care about is master, except for when you're in a detached state, then you should know that you're in a detached state. That just means that you can't like commit and push as normal. So just view what we just did as kind of like an exploring mechanism where you can like check out different versions and see what broke what. There's a lot more advanced stuff you can do in that sort of arena, like reverting back to those older versions and so forth. But for now, we'll just leave it at you can use git log and git checkout in order to check out other versions, and then once you're done, you can use git checkout master just to go back to the master and get out of that oblivion state. Alright, the last thing we're going to talk about is if you want to collaborate with other people. Git is super nice for working with other people because like even if you're both editing the same file, like if one person adds a line to the beginning of the file and then one person adds a line to the end of the file, you can both like push your changes and then pull the other person's changes, and you'll be just fine as long as you didn't like edit the same line or like too close to the same line. Then Git should be able to figure out like how to merge your guys' changes. So I'll explain it like this. If person A adds their code, commits it, and then pushes to Git, then person B needs to add their code, commit their changes, and then before they push, like you can try and push. If you try and push, it'll just tell you, oh, you can't do that because someone else has pushed before you, so you need to pull. So person B needs to add, commit, and then pull the other person's changes, and then they can push their own changes. And by the way, the way that you pull is you run git pull origin master. So git push and git pull are like exactly the same syntax. So instead of git push, you just do git pull first. And the reason is because like person B, they just need to pull down those changes and then resolve any conflicts that there might be. Like if you both happen to change the same line, then you'll need to like resolve those conflicts. And that's kind of more advanced, but this is how you work on a team. You always have to pull the other person's changes first, and then you can push. So you'd run git pull, and then git push origin master. Okay, and then that'll push your commit and like any resolutions that you have to any conflicts. But there usually aren't conflicts as long as you communicate with your team and make sure that you're each working on like distinct areas and not conflicting changes. And also, I'll just mention briefly that, and this is very important, it's very good practice to make like isolated changes to like specific features. Like, say you're building a home page, I kind of described it earlier. If you're both working on the home page, like you each want to work on very succinct parts, like very isolated features if possible. Like one person adds the nav bar, and the other person builds the actual home page, like the content of the home page. And then you, like once each person finishes those things, then they add, commit, and push those changes, pulling if necessary. And then like the reason you want to do that is because you don't want your commits to be like these big things. You want them to be kind of isolated. That way it minimizes the chance of conflicts. Like if one person just goes out in isolation and it's just working for like a week by themselves, they're probably going to change more and more files, and like other people that are just working directly, like committing regularly, like as soon as they pull the other person's changes, it's very, very likely that the other person has changed something that the other person wanted to change. So it's very good practice to like keep your changes very isolated and push, like add, commit, and push as early as possible. Not too early, like you don't want to commit every single letter separately, right? But like isolated features, very good practice. Alright, I think that wraps it up for this video. I know there's a lot of information, you guys, but it's all really good information. You'll get better at this with practice, but everything I said in this video is extraordinarily important if you want to back up your code, work on a team, and just in general be a more valuable programmer. So I recommend doing all those things that I said in this video. Thanks for watching, you guys. Thanks for getting all the way to the end. Be sure to like and subscribe if you do enjoy my content. Also leave a comment below. Let me know what your guys' thoughts are. If you like this series on the basics, if you want to see more videos like this. Again, thanks for watching. Subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.